Welcome to First Light and Beyond. I'm your host, Darrell Jenkins. In my podcast, I will guide you on an incredible journey through amateur astronomy and the best of visual observing. In today's episode, I'll talk about the premise of my book, describe how I started in astronomy, and then explain how I developed the idea for the book from inception to publishing. Let's get started. You own a telescope because you want to see the universe with your own eyes. Anyone can look up pictures of the universe on the internet, but you want to personally connect with these beautiful celestial treasures and gain a deeper understanding of what you see. There is something very special about visual observing. Real-time observations at the eyepiece can give us such an ethereal yet visceral feeling that connects us with our universe in very unique ways. After acquiring their telescope, many have wondered, now what? Time for first light. First light is the moment you turn your telescope optics toward the heavens and take in that first celestial sight through the eyepiece. But then, after this moment, more questions begin to arise. How can I make the best use of my telescope? What can I see with it? How can I get the most out of my instrument? My book will show the beginner how to make a success of astronomical observing. Beginners today are privileged to live in a time when so many great professional and amateur astronomers have already paved the way for us and provided a fantastic context within which to begin a journey into visual astronomy. There are many texts available for either those who know absolutely nothing about astronomy or for the experienced who are ready to find very challenging objects with little or no assistance. One of my goals is to fill the gap between those two stages of development. Many of my listeners already own a modest-sized telescope or a pair of binoculars. In the episodes to come, we will cover a lot of great objects you can see with a small to medium aperture telescope, or a good pair of binoculars, or in some cases, with only your eyes. I first fell in love with astronomy when I was about 6 years old. I remember our family driving home from a friend's house, and I looked up into the night sky through the car window. And it was inky black, and there were all these pretty sparkly things in the sky. I just soaked it up. As the years went on, I began to look for books in school about stars and telescopes, and some of those books were hard to come by. But when I was about 10 years old or so, I really had a lot of help from my middle school librarian. Her name is Ingrid Johnson. She was absolutely wonderful because she set aside a magazine that I still read to this day. She would always set aside the monthly issue of Sky and Telescope. I would pore over all of the pictures of Jupiter and Saturn and the stars and the galaxies and just want to be able to see those things with my own eyes. One of my favorite teachers made it a point to tell my father that I was really, really into the night sky and that he might want to think about getting me a telescope. Well, I was very fortunate. At age 11, my father bought me my first telescope. It was a small reflector of about 4 inches in diameter. And I took that thing out as often as I possibly could, even in the cold and the snow. I just wanted to be able to see for myself what was in the night sky. Now, the challenge that I found as a young person, I could hardly understand many of the books and even the articles in Sky and Telescope. They were a little bit too complex for me, about 11 or 12 years old. So, as time went on, if I found a book that simplified things, I would really make it a point to try to master what they were saying. Now, as an adult, I was able to kind of look back over all of the publications that I used to get a good understanding of astronomy, and I found they fell into two camps. They were either too complex and leaned towards astrophysics, which for, an 11 or 12-year-old was way over my head, or the books were too simplistic, um, almost insulting. Here's the moon, go out and find the moon. Well, most people can do that. So I always wanted to find that one book that had everything in it, all of the tips and tricks that I learned by taking my own telescope out and just trying to find things on my own. We didn't have computerized telescopes when I was a kid, and when I became an adult, yes, there's computerized telescopes, but I found them very unaffordable. So I felt that there had to be a way of teaching people that they do not have to spend a lot of money to enjoy astronomy. They should be able to read a book that's not too complex, not insulting, but something that grabs their attention and shows them step by step all of the things that many books just kind of gloss over and assume that you know. And these are actually, very deep concepts for visual observing. But if you break them down into simple terms that people can understand, well, then the light goes on. And so that's what I tried to do with the book First Light and Beyond, making a success of astronomical observing. And so, what I'm trying to do in this podcast is help people learn from the best ideas in my book in a practical way. You can put on your headphones, go outside, look into the night sky with your eyes or with your binoculars or your telescope and see the things that I'm talking about and really get excited about how far away they are. What are they made of? And what makes it so important for us to be able to see these objects and then talk to other people about them? So, how did I start the book from inception to publishing? That pretty much was how I conceived the idea, but it wasn't until the year 2014 or so, maybe a little bit before that, that I was approached by someone at Springer Publishing because they were looking for someone to write another title for the Patrick Moore Astronomy series. And I had this idea in my head. And so when I found out that they were looking for someone to write a book, I started typing out my thoughts. And I pitched it to the agent for the publishing company, for Springer. And he thought it was a great idea. He thought it was fantastic. And he shared it with the editor for popular astronomy books at Springer. And she thought, well, it does seem to have some merit. Why don't you have Darrell send in some sample chapters? So I had never been published before, and it's certainly a daunting task at first. There's a lot of factors that go into writing a book, but I was very excited about this idea, and I just plugged away. I put down pen to paper, and I think I turned in maybe 2 chapters, something like that. I was very lucky and fortunate that it went over very, very well. And I was asked to write the entire book. And so back in 2015, the book was completely finished, it was published, and the rest is history. So I definitely encourage you to pick up a copy of the book because I can guarantee you, if you've struggled before picking up books in your library and thinking, "Wow, this is pretty deep. I don't know if I can do this." Well, if you check out the book, you're going to feel very encouraged. You're going to feel like this is something that I can learn. It's step by step by step, and it's easy the way it's explained. But I got to say again, the most important part is for you to go outside and get excited about that. It is great to read. I'm a huge reader and I'm a book fanatic. Okay, I have so many books and I just love books. But when it comes to astronomy, there comes a moment where you have to put the book down and go outside, and that's where the magic really happens. Thank you for listening to this second episode of First Light and Beyond. I hope that you will join me next week and listen in to how you can find your way around the night sky with basic distance and direction. We'll also talk about a few NSTs, night sky tips, about the objects that you can see during the month of August. Now, I'd like to make a brief shout out to my friend Beth Mund. Beth is the host of the Casual Space podcast. She inspired me a couple of years ago to start my own podcast. And if you haven't heard her podcast yet, press pause now and go over to her podcast. Beth has over 100 episodes, and the content of the Casual Space podcast is phenomenal. So, Beth Munn, thank you again. Your work has been inspirational. Thanks again to all of my listeners, and remember, you can make a success of astronomical observing.